In June is a big month for Litecoin. We have the wallet that just came out a couple days ago that's pending review for Google Chrome extensions. The Chinese marketplace, which is unilit.io, which also has the English translation. That team they sound and they look, from my conversations, very responsible. That should be up and running fully for everybody to use this month, as well as Litescribe should have their LTC20 marketplace this month. Litecoin Labs will have a full NFT marketplace online this month with beta testing. Hopefully in the next few days, roughly the 16th, we'll test one collection on there to see kind of where we're going to have to upgrade our servers. But that will be non-custodial, so you'll be able to keep all of your stuff inside your wallets. If you want to prepare for that, use the Litescribe wallet, because that's what we're going to be integrating for signing transactions. So it'll be like you're using MetaMask. That's the idea. We want to make it as easy as possible.
Bitcoin Ordinals. I'm very excited for this because there's been a lot of developments in the Litecoin Ordinal space since Luke and I had last talked. Back in, what was that, February or March, Emblem Vault helped the creator of Litecoin Punks, which is Luke and Co, vault a bunch of Litecoin Punks to sell on OpenSea, because at the time there was no wallet infrastructure. And it seems like now there's a few that are popping up, and as well as a marketplace, an inscription service, a labs. Luke is also one of the co-founders of Lite Labs, which I'll let him describe once we get into this conversation, but a lot of stuff going on in the Litecoin Ordinal ecosystem. So Luke, excited to have you on. Thanks for sharing your time.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate it. And yeah, it's starting to get pretty good. The development's working on over here, but we appreciate Emblem Vault and your guys' crew initially taking a chance on us. And we're very thankful for that, because at that time, you're right, there was really nothing. There was really nothing for us that we could really do other than just use the Ord client at that time. But it has since developed, and you're kind of seeing things just as much as, not just as much as Bitcoin, but it's amazing to see just how everything is shifting, the amount of work and jobs that are being created by these two chains that people primarily saw as just kind of a currency type chain, base layers. So it's really exciting.
Well, like I have a pretty large appreciation for Litecoin. It was one of the first cryptos that I purchased back in 2017. I think that's when it was only 3 tokens listed on Coinbase at the time. It was like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. And then Charlie kind of dumped on all of us at the end. But Litecoin,
yeah, no, I feel
Litecoin's always been that, they call it a test net, which, right, Bitcoin testnet, even though it's not, but it generally does get new upgrades before Bitcoin. People kind of watch it, right? It has 4 times the block space and speed and all of that other fun stuff. But when it comes to ordinals, it's so much cheaper and faster to inscribe that now I believe there's 5 million Litecoin Ordinals that have been created. I saw that the largest LTC community, LTC20, which is the BRC20 equivalent, has over 90,000 owners. Like, what is going on over there?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It is reaching to that 5 million mark, which is nothing to be ashamed of. About a little under halfway of what Bitcoin is at. But you're right. It ends up being cheaper. So there's a few things that you can end up doing that you might not be able to do necessarily on Bitcoin right now, but with the recursive movement that's just going on, a lot of people are going to realize that you don't need a lot of fees to be paid to do what you want to do, which is awesome. And there's going to be a lot more things that people, I guess, don't really realize what's possible with those. But reaching back over onto the Litecoin side, the LTC20, the 90,000 holders, what is that? Well, theoretically, when you're running your own personal node and you're minting these that are available to mint that anybody can deploy, just like you would on BRC20 side of things, a lot of the people, we didn't have the wallets or the infrastructure built out fully. So what people were using is they were either using an inscription service, or they wanted to have an even cheaper option, which would be running your own client, as we all know. And when running your own client, the version that it started on was 0.5.0 of Ordinal client, which did not have the destination input yet. So what happened is when people would mint these things, it would go under a unique address almost every time. So if someone minted 100 of these things, they would have 100 unique addresses depending on the deviation path of their master key, basically. On the other side of things, we've seen a huge shift in, I guess, the Asian community, the Chinese community, not only in BRC20 and Bitcoin side of things, but even on Litecoin, to the fact where we've seen and had pictures of whole computer centers of people trying to mint out these tokens over there. And it was hilarious to kind of see that whole backstory. But there is quite a few people and the movement, and at least within the Chinese community, they really like Litecoin at the moment. So if you look on the gate.hk, which is the Hong Kong version of crypto, at least for the last couple of weeks, that basically the news came out that Hong Kong and the regulations over there in China, Litecoin has been traded, at least by volume, the most currently. So I think that had something to do a little bit with the amount of attention it got, because they're going to look at that and see what's new. But the cheapest side of things helps. I mean, if Litecoin was essentially the same price as Bitcoin, you're essentially paying roughly the same amount based on the Satoshis that you're inscribing on. Or Latoshis, whatever you want to look at it at. But yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a growing space, but let's go a little bit to the back of kind of how this all started. You had approached myself and Adam back in, I don't know, what was it, like March or something like that, with this idea that you were doing Litecoin Punks. And it was one of the, I think it was a sub 1,000 collection of inscriptions, very, very early to that. How did you stumble across something like this? Of course, punks are always kind of the meta. It's always punks and pepes all the way down across every chain. Such an easy kind of like layup. You guys added your own twist to it. But how did you come across Litecoin Ordinals? And tell us a little about your experience of creating Litecoin Punks, where I believe the highest sale was around 7 ETH at the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. So originally, obviously, the ordinals caught my attention on the Bitcoin side of things. And when things are made on Bitcoin, ideally they can be made onto Litecoin or Dogecoin, vice versa. As we kind of covered before, sometimes people consider Litecoin to be the testnet for Bitcoin. So initially, it got my thinking around like late January. I'm surprised nobody's done this on like one of the other chains yet. I mean, obviously Bitcoin is king and Bitcoin's going to have all the market share, but there's always going to be trickles of market alongside of all these other chains as well. And I happen to have a miner that I mine Litecoin with as well. And I'm thinking, oh, well, if I use a miner and I'm reading into all the Bitcoin stuff, and you can only do a certain number of megabytes per inscription, there's a limit, but if you have a miner, you can do more. I was thinking, oh, I could do something huge with Litecoin because I actually have a miner. And that it didn't really matter because Litecoin was obviously cheaper and whatnot. But the whole premise basically started on the fact of I was in the Bitcoin community and I made some of the early websites and actually some of the first metadata models for inscriptions, that thus being ordinal tortoises, the Taproot Punks. I think you actually, some of the community you first joined was Taproot Punks. So
yep, that was my first. That was my first ordinal that I ever.
Wow, there we go. So that was one of the things that I helped create over there and kind of push their metadata onto their site and just kind of make that user experience more familiar to like Ethereum users, because the waves that we saw were a lot of Ethereum users and Ethereum NFT people coming on to these base layer chains, not knowing how it all works. Like, is there rarities? Is there traits? Is there metadata? Is this just an image? How do I have a wallet? So that's where I started. And then basically just kind of pushing over as soon as I saw the bounty for Litecoin and the Litecoin Ordinals, I tried forking it and I ran into a lot of problems myself, which was completely fine. And then I just was like, I saw Anthony, got in connection with Anthony, who is the person who ended up forking Ordinals onto Litecoin. And he had basically had it done in just like about a week or less, and got in connection with him and then was able to use, of course, the Ord software to kind of start this venture with Litecoin Labs and Litecoin Punks, etc.
So how many people are a part of Light Labs or Litecoin Labs? You mentioned the person who posted the bounty originally, which I believe was about $2,000 in Litecoin at the time, which when you think about it, with the money that's spent in this space, seems so low, but it was cool that he did it. So the person who posted the bounty, you have the dev who forked Ordinals to create Litecoin Ordinals yourself. Is this like a larger cohort? It's just you three? And also, what is the intention or goals of Litecoin Labs?
Yeah. So as you can see, it's having trouble loading there on your screen.
Yeah.
I believe it's reorging at the moment. So that is something that, of course, Bitcoin and Litecoin and I mean Dogecoin reorgs almost every day. But that's a problem. But back to your question there. Yeah, so we have 5 people on staff, and basically 3 of them are developers, and then the other 2 are mainly marketing as well as communications type stuff that we do. And aside from that, there's probably about 20 developers in the community that are kind of outside that sometimes we contract, as well as they just build things entirely, and a few more come on like every day. When I say 20 devs, that doesn't sound like a lot at all, and it really is not. I'm assuming there's more that we just don't know, but I'm in connection with about just around 20 or so. And the roles of everybody around here is myself. I'm a developer as well, so I do develop on the Ordinals protocol, as well as do the front end and some of the back end for these sites. And then we have Slick, who is the other co-founder, who basically came up and said, hey, like, let's get the ball rolling after the Bitcoin Ordinals came out, and kind of turned me on to Litecoin more so. And Litecoin was actually one of the first coins that I purchased around 2017 as well, just because it was cheaper than Bitcoin at the time. So I was like, oh, this is cool, I'll buy it. But yeah, aside from that, Anthony he's like the giga brain over here, and he's the one that obviously made the Ordinals fork, and then currently working on with the wallet, which is known as the Unisat fork version, which is the Litescribe. The original first sales of the Bitcoin or the Litecoin punks that we had, a lot of that ended up actually like not even hitting anybody's pockets, but more so going to Emblem Vault for all your guys' help, and then going towards Anthony for basically development and bounties, as well as creating new bounties. So we put out about, probably I would say 5 more bounties. One of them is like a launch pad. One of them was the Litescribe wallet that has just been completed. One of them was just any wallet in general to just add Ordinal support, which happened to be Stack Wallet. And then just obviously over time, the LTC20 stuff, which we ended up kind of bringing on solely as kind of like a Litecoin Labs, which then turned into Litescribe partnership type stuff. But the goal is basically here is we just want to make sure that what can be done on Bitcoin can also be done on Litecoin. And there's a huge community around it now, and we're very thankful for it. But it's coming together, and the fact that everybody is somewhat patient with us, and the slower development process has been a blessing in itself. So there's a lot of people that they don't mind it, and they're here because the technology's new, and that's why I went to Bitcoin right away.
Yeah, so here I pulled up Litescribe. You can see the Litescribe wallet fork of Unisat. Looks almost exactly the same. You guys got to change that UI.
Yeah, we do have to change that. I'm working on the UI this in the next, actually probably today later on. But
and here's the Litescribe, the inscription service. This was here first before the LTC20. Do you look into the back end and see, or do you watch like the explorers to see what type of stuff is being minted? What type of trends are you seeing? Is it exactly the same stuff that's happening on Bitcoin, or is there some type of cultural difference?
That's a really good question. I would say everything that has happened on Bitcoin has been at least tried on Litecoin. There's been some interesting things going on right now. And it's a lot of people thought they were getting their wallets dusted, which happened a long time ago. And what that was used for was like to track wallets in a way. But in terms of like this case, these were ordinals that were being sent to people, and the person behind it is a Litecoin whale, like a crazy person who's basically throwing out the idea of like block space. And this is kind of something that has been on Bitcoin, but it's a lot more expensive to inscribe things that hold megabytes in block space. This person, though, in general, who's been doing this, has, I think, inscribed close to like over 100,000 ordinals onto Litecoin just by himself, and it's all terminologies that's based with block space, and eventually to be able to sell like land block space to people or to rent out block space. So it's a new concept that I haven't really driven into, but that is like kind of the trend that I've been seeing. And one thing that is different from Bitcoin that Litecoin has is MWeb. MWeb being Mimblewimble protocol, and it's essentially another layer onto Litecoin that's on its base layer that allows somewhat of privacy type transactions. It's more of like a big pool of Litecoin that you can peg into and then peg out to, and you don't necessarily get the same UTXO or the same Litoshi. Over the last couple of days, I know we have put stuff into MWeb to start testing that and to kind of see what we can actually do with that protocol. And there's been some very interesting findings with it all. And it's really helped myself at least understand how, Mimblewimble MWeb works. And this is something that I could see Bitcoin actually adding. And I know it's probably been talked about in the Bitcoin forums as Mimblewimble, because it wasn't necessarily proposed as a Litecoin feature right away. It was actually the Mimblewimble white paper, if you look at it, actually talks about it being primarily on Bitcoin. It just was never added. But there's some cool things where you could have almost like roulette or lottery in a way using Mimblewimble, which, you got to be in the right location to even host something like that. You can have now with recursive, we could put stuff like privacy coins. We can make almost like privacy LTC20s, which is something completely new, or even peg it to Bitcoin's recursive. There's like your little alpha that we're working on, is actually being able to have ordinals linked cross chain. Now, the question for you is I actually wanted to ask you something about Emblem Vault real quick while I got you. Does Emblem Vault have the capability to vault to more than 2 wallets into a single vault?
Yeah. So there's this idea. There's a handful of ideas of people who try to do this. There's one called super tokens, where if somebody creates like a duplicate, if you have like CryptoPunk 5555 on Bitcoin and Litecoin, you could put them in the same wallet and kind of have it as a twin. Right now, the legacy vaults, they're the ones that hold all 12 different deposit addresses. But moving forward, as we move into this curated collection, right, so that everything will have its own individual smart contract, we are programming the functionality to hold multiple wallets at a time. So for example, and I guess this is a little bit of an alpha too. So I deployed Jake on BRC20. I deployed Jake on LTC20. And I deployed it on SRC20. So one of the ideas was like, hey, what if I just put all 3 of these into a vault, right? You could do the same limit, 1,000 or whatever it is for each. And then you could trade, Jake, BRC, SRC, and LTC at the same time inside of a vault.
Backs, yeah.
Yeah, and so like that kind of possibility is fun. Sometimes you think like, what is the purpose even of it? But it's like, for me, it's, you don't know until you put yourself in that situation to know kind of the emotions or maybe just some of the interest around it. Some of the dumbest stuff in the space gets a lot of attraction and then turns out to be, quite rewarding or game changing. Like the whole thing of BRC20s, everyone's like, this is stupid. Right now it's like, now it could revolutionize Bitcoin of doing DeFi on Bitcoin and some of these other things. But with LTC20, so can you walk through how would that work cross chain with recursive? Is that already also being implemented on Litecoin? And is it just like something like a pointer, kind of like what you see with IPFS? If you're going to reference a Bitcoin ordinal from a Litecoin ordinal, am I getting that right? Just kind of walk through it.
Yeah, no, you're basically spot on. So essentially, like, recursive stuff has technically always been there. It's just has, like, you can inscribe all the different types of code, but does the actual ordinals protocol, does it index that? Like, does it view it properly? So like that's for example, like we saw OCM do their recursive stuff that they've had inscribed since February. In the same sense, there's actually quite a few people who have done this too, on both chains. And it's just a matter of how you index it and how you view it. So to answer your question, like, yes, that will come to Litecoin in a future update with how the indexer and the explorer views it. We normally like to stay on par with what Bitcoin is doing. That way we don't get too deviated from it, because we'd like to stay roughly the same. Like, that's the premise of it. But yes, in terms of how it would view it. So say you have an inscription on Litecoin, you go ahead and you form basically a recursive ordinal through basically an iframe on Bitcoin, and you call to Litecoin's Explorer. That could potentially work if it's loud. I think right now recursive might just be in referencing other ordinals within the Bitcoin ordinals, from what I saw via the sandboxing term. It kind of just limits you to what's being pulled. But yes, that is something that can be added to where you can have something inscribed on Litecoin or Bitcoin, and then have the recursive ordinal being the iframe data that pulls it, and the script and how it's put together, if it's generative art, the JS, whether it's P5 JS or 3JS or anything like that, piece it all together, which is really, really outstanding, which is kind of what you guys are thinking about doing kind of with your LTC20 in a way, but vaulting it more so with Ethereum. So it's crazy. Like you said, sometimes the stupidest things end up taking off, and really, what is it? It might just be more bloat at the end of the day. But it's something that I feel like if people were to deep dive into, and like, if we at least put the steps out there for people to be able to use, somebody might take it and run with it. The right people might, sometimes the wrong people might. So we're hoping gets into the right people's hands and they kind of look at it. But that's the answer to your question there.
Yeah, it looks like, so this is, I came across Unilit. It's I think this is the first LTC20 marketplace that I'm aware of. Is this a Litecoin Labs project, or is this a different community?
So that is a complete Chinese community.
Awesome.
That is going hard in that. And I don't know, at least from my conversations with them, we are giving them a grant. Like, they applied for our grants that we're also giving out. So that's also kind of what some of the funding has gone for, is we've set forth like 10 LTC to 20 LTC grants to give out to people who want to build and at least have some sort of a product to show. So they're receiving one of our grants. But as far as I know, this is primarily reliant on LiteScribe right now. They don't actually have their index fully finished, but the demo of it and everything that should be, the demo is out, but the live version should come in the next couple of weeks here. It looks quite promising. Now, I say that, and I don't want people to go and, dump all your money, put all your coins into it, because it does look like it might be more custodial.
Yeah.
Taking a custodial approach. So we're hoping that they integrate maybe like the LiteScribe wallet, the Unisat fork, or at least offer pre-signed Bitcoin transactions, in this case, pre-signed Litecoin transactions. So looking forward, yes, that will be one of the first markets for LTC 20 specifically, as well as LiteScribe will have their market within a couple weeks or less. The primarily focus was we needed that wallet before we needed absolutely everything. Like, that was something we put off way too long. So very thankful for that. And that was also a bounty. So we were able to, aside from just paying them from the original mint, also provide some bounty support, and just it also got more people involved because other people were trying to make the wallet. So it just got more people involved into the Litecoin. So hopefully that can trickle into more developers, but we'll see. Everybody goes where the money goes, and That's just how it works.
Yeah, speculation leads to developer activity and then leads to marketing, and right, it's a full circle of how that happens. The back end of the Litecoin Ordinal space, does it face a similar issue with centralization of the indexers, or is it because Litecoin is built slightly different? There's different ways to go about building some of the infrastructure. And if so, or if not, like what are the differences of how the back end of Litecoin Ordinals is being built compared to Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's basically the same. Somebody could theoretically go and make their own version of an indexer. Sure. So for example, like we saw with Dogecoin, there was multiple people making indexers, the Cardinals, the Doginals, and just kind of that whole feed. So theoretically, somebody could go and launch their version of Ordinals on Litecoin, just as they could on Bitcoin, and make a different indexer and how everything is viewed, so forth. I would say the reason we haven't had that is because we've been very consistent in helping people and actually having that open source fully to the point where people are we're actually okay with, like, let's make this the priority. And that's the consensus on Bitcoin, whereas like first is first consensus, where it's with even the XBT names, first is first, that kind of consensus is the same thing with indexers. First is first. Now on Bitcoin, I don't remember who had the first BRC20 indexer. I want to say it was probably Unisat. And I don't know if Unisat actually gave out their indexer right away. I know they had parts of it that they did have open source, but other parts of it and how they actually calculated and everything like that wasn't actually open sourced at the moment. But yeah, so the open consensus there is it is somewhat, the indexer might be somewhat centralized because one entity started it. I guess they have the ability to change it. So that unfortunately is like, that's how that works. And that's kind of how it works on Bitcoin as well. I think there's this consensus in the public that regardless of that little bit being centralized, everybody's using it. And since it's open sourced, I guess that makes it somewhat decentralized in a way. So I guess it depends on what side of the coin you're on, if you're going to be a maxi or if you're going to be like a hater or a doer on either side of things. But there's the consensus on that.
The indexing prop it's interesting. There's two sides to it. There's the one where how I kind of view this. Most of us in this space want decentralization, but decentralization scales at a much slower rate than what centralization can do. And then on the same side as well, if you're a builder, if you're an entrepreneur, you can only work with the tools that currently exist, right? Or you can build it out, which takes a little bit longer. So with this central indexing, I kind of view it as similar to like how Bitcoin nodes operate, where Satoshi was the first one to spin up a node. And then as more people join the network, then more people had the option to do it. And here it's similar. It's a little bit more of like a B2B side where any business who wants to run the indexing to make sure that all the information is the same, you go to Unisat and they do give it out. We've talked with them. I know a handful of teams that have also got that information. It is public. I do believe the private keys or the keys to the API are limited until you go talk to them. Then they'll give you unlimited rate access because depending on who you are. But Unisat and these marketplaces that are running indexers are incentivized to pass it out, right? If they're the leader in the space, they want to make sure that other people are able to confirm that information because then it attracts new users. Yes, we do like to, kind of play in these walled gardens. There's definitely money to be made there. But if you want to grow the entire ecosystem, you have to be able to pass that out. But on the other side as well, I could see this situation on Bitcoin or Litecoin, it's just this indexing solution or issue where on Ethereum, those who are building standards and protocols really just focus on that. They're not really focused on the infrastructure. Whereas here you have products and teams building the infrastructure and the product. So if you're handing out the keys to the API access, right? you could then theoretically go build a competing marketplace using their kind of APIs infrastructure. So there's, I think, kind of the future of where that indexing situation is that these marketplaces are going to have to partner up together, whether it's like a rev share or product launches together or something like that. Or everyone's just going to kind of go build their own competing walled gardens. And I don't think anyone kind of wins in that situation. On the other side, right, the decentralization everyone wants. You want decentralized indexers. You want everyone to be able to access that information. But that's just not really how anything works. It's just not how reality works. Even Bitcoin began centralized, right? It was just Satoshi kind of mining. And it took, I think, almost a week until somebody else decided to spin up, until Hal Finney spun up his own node, right? The infamous running Bitcoin node. So with Litecoin, or the running Bitcoin tweet, I should say. So I think we'll probably see something similar on Litecoin, although I'm unsure because of Mimblewimble and how indexers interact with that because of the private transaction aspect to it. Could you maybe just describe a little bit more about Mimblewimble? Like, what does that mean to Litecoin, and how much of an advantage does that give the community over Bitcoin and maybe some of the infrastructure that's required to support it?
Yeah, I can most definitely do that. And all your points there are good. I kind of wanted to touch on, like, obviously, if you're a viewer of the podcast, you know who Jake is. And if you kind of look at his tweets, a lot of them kind of reference kind of early Ethereum DeFi. And that's honestly kind of what we're seeing over here. But I just want to say, like, kind of what he was saying, if we all end up working together and pushing towards something, not building walls, it could have a way better outcome and experience than what has happened on Ethereum. Now, I truly believe in Ethereum to the end as well, but that's just something I wanted to touch on first. Now into Mimblewimble. So I would say Mimblewimble and how it essentially works is it's a big pool of funds. And I don't want to use the word tumbler, but we'll use something. We'll use a shifter, a mixer, you know, a blender. We'll use a blender. That's basically what Mimblewimble is. And is you can take your Litecoin from not all the wallets support it. I think only Litecoin Core running a node supports it. That is something that should happen towards the end of this year. Is a lot of mobile wallets and other wallets will get support for Mimblewimble because it's relatively new as of 2020, late 2021, 2022. Made by David. David was the developer. I can't think of his last name. I think it's Burkett. But anyway, how it ends up working is you take your Litecoin and you send it to a Mimblewimble address. It doesn't have to be yours. It can be somebody else's. Say you have 10 Litecoin and I send it to a MWeb address that I own. It will be LTC MWeb1 is kind of the starting point of that. Whereas we see with like Bitcoin, it's BTC1 for like Taproot or whatever, BTCP maybe, I can't remember. But you'd take your 10 Litecoin, you'd send it to your MWeb address, and it would take 2 confirmations. Now, Litecoin, you can send on 1 confirmation. This would take 2 confirmations to send, and it's on the base layer, but it's also an elevated layer in itself. Think about, like, if you're thinking about an onion, you still have the whole onion as the base of the thing, but you still have somewhat of layers outside of its core. And you'd send your 10 in, or your 10 Litecoin in, and it would peg it to the whole pool. So currently in Litecoin, there's like 16,000 Litecoin that sit in this MWeb pool. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. From there, if you wanted to basically get that Litecoin out, that 10 Litecoin, all you do is you can see it on your end. Nobody else can see it. Outside of that, the transaction doesn't come up in the blockchain. You can look at the MWeb Explorer and you can see the amounts that get pegged in on each block or the amounts that get pegged out. But that's kind of what you're limited to. So it's semi-privacy. It's not full privacy because you can see, essentially you can see if an address receives from MWeb because you can't track the you'll notice that the transaction that it came from is like, you can't find it. So you can tell that that's come from MWeb. So you would peg out by sending from your MWeb address, your 10 Litecoin or whatever, or 5 Litecoin, however much you want to peg out that you pegged in, to a normal address. And that would take, again, 2 confirmations to peg out, but it's not going to be the same Litecoin that you actually put in there. So for example, I mean, how this really helped me understand even MWeb was actually ordinals by doing testing in this way is I found that when I pegged into MWeb, I sent a few ordinals there, and I just kind of watched it basically on ordinals theory and seeing how it reacted with the address. It never showed an MWeb address that it was on, but you could see the output value because they bleed inputs and outputs in MWeb into this blender and mixer. You could see the value of it right around the 16,000 worth of Litecoin. And you're like, oh, okay. So it is in MWeb. You can see the transaction come through on the MWeb Explorer. You can't see like the transaction ID, but you can see the amount that was put in. And you notice that this ordinal had basically 16,000 Litecoin involved, and the address was a taproot address. So Litecoin has taproot, but Litecoin's taproot is not necessarily enabled on all wallets, and not everything is all used. The BIP86 is taproot, and it's there. It's not used on Litecoin Core. It's only used on a few mobile wallets that use it, and it's primarily only used because of Mimblewimble at this current time. And I actually didn't know that going into it, but seeing that the address changed about every block confirmation in Mimblewimble. So there's been about like 200 and some thousand blocks that have been confirmed over the course of Mimblewimble's lifetime. And the address changed on the ordinal every time. The output value would stay the same or change based on how much, based on the value that was in Mimblewimble or out of Mimblewimble. So it showed that it was somewhat of a tumbler, a blender. The addresses changed, which also means that if somebody were to get that ordinal, which did happen, I put an ordinal in, and about a day later, it actually ended up hitting somebody's address in an exchange, which was quite amusing to see, actually, and how it actually stopped. It is now in somebody's possession, and they have no idea that they actually own this ordinal, unless they're watching it. But that is kind of how the MWeb kind of portion works in kind of the easiest terms that I can try to put it in. What does it bring, and what is like the benefits of it compared to Bitcoin? I think the layer that this provides could be a layer that, maybe governments could actually use in the future. Not everybody wants to know exactly what, I mean, private corporations, they don't want everybody to know what essentially they're doing, but they have to be public in some sense. So what it does is it does show that you put so-and-so amount into MWeb, and it does show that you took so-and-so amount out of MWeb if you do it. But you can also make payments in that way. So I could send to your MWeb address. People could see that I sent this amount of money, but they're not going to know what it was for, or they're not going to be able to actually view the transaction. Only you would see the end of transaction, and I would see kind of what is at least what I sent, and you see what you received. I wouldn't be able to see if you pegged it out or any amount out. I wouldn't be able to see that because you would only know your address that you peg it out to. So it adds this layer of privacy that Bitcoin currently doesn't have. Now, I do ease with speculation. I think it's good that Bitcoin hasn't added it yet, just to see how the long-term effects have played out on Litecoin. And so far, it hasn't caused any downtime on Litecoin. It actually kind of gives another layer of transactions that can actually be used in a way that don't interfere with the transactions on the network in general. Because it's somewhat of essentially of another scaling layer, it could actually work on Bitcoin to help it actually reduce the layer fees. So the amount of Satoshis that it would take to make a transaction could be different if people were using MWeb transactions. So say people don't agree with the Ordinals protocol, and they don't agree that they're putting all this data onto the blockchain and indexing it and causing all these high fees. Well, they could use MWeb on Bitcoin and essentially almost escape some of those fees. So there's a benefit that, maybe in the future, Bitcoin could honestly kind of take from. But I would encourage, if there's any Bitcoin developers that are listening to that or have thought about that, just like seriously, just take it to the forums and make sure that everybody's on par with that before you start doing anything, because we still don't know how, I guess, the SEC might look at it. I don't think they'll look at it in any negative way. I say that with a little bit of salt, because all the rules that get changed every day. But Litecoin was made from Bitcoin as a fork, one of the first forks aside from, I guess, Namecoin. And it was fair launch, just like Bitcoin was. I mean, I guess centralized at the first part with, I guess, Charlie Lee's probably first node. But that is like, how would we see Litecoin on that end with MWeb? How would other people view it comparative to Bitcoin, comparative to Litecoin? And then how would the SEC view it? I know this is probably not even on the question, but it's kind of a topic that some people are definitely looking into. They haven't hit Monero, really. So if they haven't hit Monero, I think we're pretty good on that end.
Yeah, you've seen Mimblewimble. I remember Mimblewimble was implemented in some privacy coins like Grin. Beam, I think, was one of them. Mm-hmm. And I know the Bitcoin community has been asking for private transactions for a while, but of course, to reach a high degree of social consensus on Bitcoin takes much longer than it does on some of these different chains. It's very similar to, right, the forsaken word CoinJoin, I guess, right? That's probably the one that you're trying to circle around, right? Some cat's out of the bag. It was, it was integrated into, what was that wallet? Wasabi wallet? Something like that. The U.S. governments have kind of come out against it. They've also, kind of, they've put a notice on Tornado Cash, so U.S. users can't go there without, kind of being flagged. But this is a little bit different because it's on the protocol level and not the product level, where once it's implemented, right, there's pretty much no way to really reverse it unless you get social consensus again on some of these decentralized chains. But just the idea of the private essentially NFT transactions is it's appealing. It's not really been done anywhere, for at least from what I'm aware of.
This is something that, with at least the private NFT transactions and what we tested, is going to be hard to really even build off of in general, because you don't know if you put something in there, if you're actually going to be able to peg it out. Like, somebody might beat you to pegging it out, which is why I referenced the term lottery earlier, or roulette. Mm-hmm. I think on Mimblewimble's standpoint, and as it stands with Litecoin in general, it is really safe, simply because, like, if a government does want to at least know or be public kind of what people are doing, they can see the transactions that essentially go in. They can see the amount that comes out, which is still good. So it offers a level of privacy when you're in the protocol, because you can send from one MWeb address to another MWeb address while you're inside of it. Again, it takes 2 confirmations instead of, I guess, the normal one with to be able to send after that. But it offers a way for it to honestly be looked at in a legal perspective as something that is actually needed, but also not as private as it could be in the same way.
Yeah. I'm going to be following it along. There's that worrisome, right? If you take 100 NFTs and throw it into Mimblewimble protocol, and everyone gets a different NFT, right? That's the complete opposite of what you would want. It's a little bit different too, because NFTs are unique. So it's a lot easier to trace, because essentially they all have like their individual ID numbers or serial numbers. Whereas if you're sending Bitcoin, it doesn't matter what Bitcoin you get, as long as, well, maybe now because of the sats that are attached to it, but it doesn't matter as long as the value matches. I'm sure there's some more opportunity in there somewhere, which is going to be quite fascinating. But moving into, past Mimblewimble, and now there's this growing ecosystem. You think some of the other metas that are happening on Bitcoin Ordinals are going to make their way over? Rare sats, on-chain art, right? PFPs are kind of already still there. I'm trying to think of like what are some of these other ones that have popped up recently. On-chain art, cursed inscriptions. Like, are those things also something that is likely to happen on Litecoin Ordinals?
Yeah, to answer that, all those things are very likely to happen. And we've seen from people inscribing that they've already technically inscribed the data. So it's there. Again, it's just a matter of just following suit with what Bitcoin has done and just indexing it in that right way, pulling the updates into it, showing the different layers of output, showing parent-child transactions, showing, I guess, generative art in that way. So yeah, it's all there, and it technically was like already there. You could inscribe whatever you wanted to. It's how, I guess, the indexer views it. So if it happens on Bitcoin, it will most likely happen on Litecoin, just a little bit at a slower rate. We don't plan on adding anything new that Bitcoin doesn't necessarily have. The only thing that we can't really change that it had that Bitcoin didn't have was Mimblewimble. But aside from that, if Bitcoin has it and adds it and it gets approved by Casey, that's the follow suit that, at least that's the rule set first is first that we are going to be trying to follow.
It's that social consensus, proof of work, because they are non-Turing complete blockchains. There has to be some sort of social consensus reached, which then eventually turns into this sort of like technical implementation, which is first is first. I tweeted that out the other day. I don't know if I've seen that on any other place in crypto. With smart contracts, people are able to just put whatever their rule set is. You place that immediately. Whereas on these proof of work chains, it's more a very open discussion, which then turns into an implementation.
Yeah, no, it's in a way, it's actually a really good governing system, honestly. I mean, as long as everybody's respecting it,
yeah.
it's not the worst thing in the world. I think even in life, morals is sometimes we think first is first, just in general.
Yeah, we were talking about this on Twitter.
Oh yeah,
shotgun, right? That's kind of what we grew up on. Or if I get dibs, right? It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, just kind of a social acceptance, and I love that it's happening on Bitcoin, and Litecoin as well. But yes.
Now that you've been involved in the Litecoin community for the last 4 to 5 months, how would you describe the existing culture that's there, right? When the ordinal space or Bitcoin Ordinals took off, Bitcoin has been around since 2009. There had been a perceived notion that the culture is quite toxic because of this maximalist take. So there is kind of this ongoing civil war, which seems to be in the favor of ordinals, maybe at least from a digital presence and not just and maybe a little bit different at conferences. How would you describe the Litecoin community that exists? Is there a community? And how are they receptive to Litecoin Ordinals?
Yeah, great question. I think just alongside with Bitcoin, Litecoin ended up having definitely the maximalists that do still hold their bags of Litecoin, really questioning it and be like, hey, do we really want to follow suit with what Bitcoin did? We see how, because I'm going to be real with you. A lot of Bitcoin maxis are also, they have a good amount of Litecoin. It's just what they say or what they don't say. But a lot of the maxis that we have on Litecoin said like, hey, I don't agree with what happened on Bitcoin. I hold a lot of Bitcoin. Let's not do this. But as the months go on and we get into more of these recursive styled inscriptions, I feel like that narrative might change a little bit. I think mainly what they're worried about is they're worried about like Bitcoin or Litecoin potentially becoming a security, essentially on the fact that base layer can potentially have tokens that could be like BRC20, LTC20, maybe unregistered securities. I think that's the scare that they're actually truly getting with it all, aside from, I guess, the block bloat. But we haven't really seen block bloat on Litecoin. We really haven't. Like the transaction costs are like less than a penny, even when it gets really bloated, I guess, when there's transactions pending, which doesn't happen relatively often. The community is there though. Like there's a Litecoin cruise going on in October. It's one of the year anniversaries apparently that they do. That's something new to me. I didn't know about. I guess it's more of a little secret society than and more public or more closed down than I guess Bitcoin is about how public they are. But a lot of them are more so open to it. And some of the people that I've seen kind of have a change of, not necessarily a change of hearts, I guess I'm not going to call them out or anything like that, but have been more open to the idea and actually put funding towards it. Have been actually some of those core developers that have made the wallets like Electrum that are on the foundation, seeing that and seeing how the increase in transactions have been paying out miners in a better rate has been good for the network, especially coming up towards the Litecoin halving. It shows that the network activity and the level of activity, aside from transactions being maybe on the scale of ordinal level, very small, it's still paying miners. In a sense, it's helped with the surgence in the hash rate of Litecoin in general has also skyrocketed for the first time in over a decade since Litecoin has been running. It actually processed more transactions than Bitcoin did around May 8th to about May 10th. It had more transactions and I guess more addresses that were using the network, but that was short lived for a little bit. But it shows that the community is, you're going to have both sides and you need to have both sides. You're not going to, like, if everybody's for it, like, it's good, but it doesn't necessarily push development in a way that could be sustainable. Because if you have everybody that's for it, everybody's just going to develop it the way that everybody wants it. Now, if we have the opposing view, you reach a middle ground to where something can actually be, I think, sustainable, which will actually lead us into our bull run of, I guess, honestly, NFTs. I think NFTs on Ethereum are here, but I do think that the Ordinals theory is going to be something that if, a lot of these bigger NFT projects on Ethereum don't pay attention to, they're going to miss out. I really do. I see it as a future, and it's not only Ordinals. The protocol is so much more than Ordinals, and people don't understand, like inscribing virtual machines, like complete virtual machines, like Linux. You can have a whole Linux machine running because it's only like a couple hundred bytes or whatever. Now with recursive, like, I guess forming businesses outside of like something that I've seen people experimenting with and I've tried, but it's beyond me, is actually using the recursive script inscriptions to basically make websites. So you fully on chain, which could lead into your site or your address or name jake.xbt to actually be a landing page that is pulled from 10 different ordinals components, almost like if you're coding in React or Angular or Node.js, where you have components and you pull from these components and you call it in a main sheet. It's basically like you're coding in React, but you're just using ordinals. So, and that would be entirely on chain. So as long as Ordinals protocol is running, you might actually be able to run a completely free website with a completely free DNS, as long as somebody, I guess, technically resolves those DNS within the window. So somebody will pay. Somebody will end up paying. But yeah.
It feels almost like magic, where for such a long time, these proof of work chains were pretty much just one use, almost considered dead. A lot of the community members had left and there was no innovation. And now everything that we've wanted of this, completely on-chain future is here. It feels like it, or at least it's being built. But I know you and I share, similar philosophies of a multi-chain future, and that a lot of these blockchains can be highly collaborative together, and you kind of pick and choose the strengths of each one to put out the best product that you choose. How are you viewing that moving forward? Is Ethereum dead in the water? Is there even going to be a use case for Ethereum? And how do you plan to use all of these interchangeably as we move into the future where NFTs exist on pretty much every blockchain?
I love that question. I'm hoping that Emblem Vault paves the way for everybody. I know they have already. I'm not going to lie.
Let's go.
But yeah, I mean, Ethereum has a lot of institutional investors and people building on it. So I'm just like, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I don't see Ethereum going away anytime soon. there's too much market share involved with it, and there's too much outside of market share that people are being paid to build on it, the infrastructure. um it's not gonna go away. All the scaling solutions that have been made for Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, all these different things, is like they only benefit it. And if it's kind of like, I mean, if we're thinking the NFT world, you're thinking of first as first, and then you think of all these derivatives. I mean, if you're getting a bunch of derivatives of what you're doing, I think you're doing a good job. Um, Ethereum is here to stay. I think it might have a little bit of an uphill battle considering that it's on proof of stake. And when I say uphill battle, I'm mainly talking about how maybe the particular governments might look at it in the future. But aside from that, the multi-chain future and how does it look with Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, all the other big chains is, if you look at it, we don't have one world currency. We don't have one world banks, one world assets. And, if that day comes, hopefully I'm gone. But it's something where it needs to happen on all the different chains, aside from it being a multi-chain thing. Everything needs to happen on all these chains because the social consensus is everybody needs to find something that they believe in, and not everybody's going to believe in the same thing. So if you allow all these multi-chains to exist and then maybe combine them in a way that, is pleasing, and people are able to agree on the consensus, the social consensus of how all of them work together, that is the future. And that's ideally kind of what a governing body is, and how you have different parties on different sides or different opposing views. All of these views and all these people in the different chains have different views of the other chains, which is good. You need that in order for crypto, and we need that in order for just this whole ideology of, decentralization to actually take place. Because what it does is it's pulling people from all over the world, no matter their situation, their point of views. They're finding something that they like. Eventually it will lead into multi-chain. But as of right now, even being the single chains and having your maximalism on one is perfectly fine, because it's a process. That's all it is.
Yeah. That's where we at Emblem Vault, we try to find what's most collaborative. Is Bitcoin has this, high degree of on-chain and ownership layer, which we believe is, probably the best in the space and probably will be. I don't see anyone overtaking that. You have superior, DeFi tooling and financial instruments that exist on Ethereum. So that's a collaborative. Then you go explore some of these other ones, right? You have like Ordinals. It's like, okay, what is the point of this? It's funny. It has a community. So how do you bring that community to the other chains? You have Litecoin, which is basically front running Bitcoin for some of these technologies. And then borrowing, right? But it scales faster. So once the Litecoin ecosystem catches up to where the Bitcoin Ordinals is, you assume it's probably going to move a little bit faster in terms of implementation, because it's a little bit more nimble. So to find where this, this blend is, I think is like a multi-billion-dollar idea. And it's, again, it's the same reference I use all the time, is just viewing blockchains as countries and viewing, the protocols built on top of it as cities, and the methods like Emblem Vault's a shipping container. You can use a bridge, or, even the recursive inscriptions across chain is not something I'd ever considered. So I'm definitely gonna have to think on that. That might even be like a fourth way now to kind of use assets across chains.
Most definitely. I just, hats off to you guys too. Just at Emblem Vault is, I know it might not have seemed like the best appeal right away to do these things, as people were maximalists, but I have a feeling you guys are going to be rewarded greatly in the future for it. And I'm just encouraging you guys, like, keep doing it. And if you need help on any side of the things, like, I'm here. The Litecoin guys are definitely able to help you on this side of things. But yes, keep going. And can't wait to see where Emblem's going to go with that too.
I appreciate that. Yeah, actually, we're going to be looking into, I guess that's alpha, is the upgrading our wallets to the Taproot wallets to be more official. So that's definitely in line, because we do acknowledge the community is finally at that point now where it's ready to start doing things outside of kind of just buying and selling. And you'll start seeing some new utilities pop up. So we'll definitely reach out to you for that once we get there. One final question is just what are some things that are up and coming in the Litecoin Ordinal space that you'd like to acknowledge or to look forward to, or maybe some comments for any individuals who have listened to this conversation, haven't considered Litecoin, and like what's the best way to get started?
Love it. So if you're familiar with Bitcoin and Ordinals there, it's primarily just the same exact thing with, I guess, a few less wallets to use. Your main wallets that you can use are going to be Stack Wallet, which is mobile friendly. You do have to know how to use coin control. So my best representation of this would be Sparrow Wallet. If you know how to use Sparrow Wallet, you're definitely going to know how to use Stack Wallet, mobile friendly PC. The best wallet to use is probably going to be the Litescribe wallet, which is the fork of Unisat. It's going to view your ordinals. It's going to display them. You don't have to worry about freezing transactions or anything like that because the balances are separated. That can be found on Litescribe.io. Some things to look forward to for Litecoin that are coming is obviously going to be the updates in how basically ordinals is displayed, that being potentially recursive inscriptions, cursed ordinals, different layers on that end. In June is a big month for Litecoin, as we have the wallet that just came out a couple days ago. That's pending review for Google Chrome extensions. Should be here a couple of days probably. The Chinese marketplace, which is unilit.io, which also has the English translation. That team is they sound and they look, from my conversations, very responsible. That should be up and running fully for everybody to use this month, as well as Litescribe should have their LTC20 marketplace this month. Litecoin Labs will have a full NFT marketplace online this month with beta testing. Hopefully in the next few days, roughly the 16th, we'll test one collection on there to see kind of where we're going to have to upgrade our servers. But that will be non-custodial, so you'll be able to keep all of your stuff inside your wallets. If you want to prepare for that, use the Litescribe wallet, because that's what we're going to be integrating for signing transactions. So it'll be like you're using MetaMask. That's the idea. We want to make it as easy as possible. So those are the few things to look forward to. I suppose something that is something different that maybe you guys could look into if you're really interested in ordinals is going to be MWeb and what you can do with MWeb and ordinals and privacy on that. That's something we're experimenting with. So it's something that, cannot be done on Bitcoin, but what can be done is you could potentially use a recursive inscription on Bitcoin to pull stuff from MWeb. So there's some stuff, if you guys want to get busy on that, we're open to everything. If you have questions, I try to answer them as best as I possibly can, or put you in with people who know how to actually answer them, because I do not know everything too. I'm learning every day. But yeah, that's the Litecoin. I think the majority of the stuff happens this month, and if you expect things and you see things on Bitcoin, it will be added to Litecoin. So
yeah, you do a fantastic job at explaining things. So I'm sure everyone who's listening greatly appreciates it. I do. I'm excited to see where it goes. I have no problem dabbling back and forth. I got my Stack wallet. I got some of my ordinals, and waiting for future. The cross chain recursed inscriptions or recursive inscriptions is very interesting to me. So I'm gonna have to dive a little bit more. So please send some stuff my way whenever that does happen.
I'll send some stuff your way. This is something that I've literally only been testing for 2-3 weeks. So it's relatively very new, but it's exciting. It is.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jake, so much.
Yeah, of course. Appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who made it this far. Check it out. Take Luke's advice. Give him a follow, and we'll see you next time.